In the 1970s, a company known as the National Steel Corporation emerged to become a leading steel company in the entire Asian continent. Its steel mill and operations, located in the city of Iligan, Philippines, was once known as Asia's largest ever. Its rise as a global contender was slated to help industrialize the archipelago country, and it helped it become the next rising economic tiger. The NSC, in simpler terms, was going to be one of the Philippines' largest economic drivers ever. It was enacted by the aggressive leaders of the country as part of the many decisive plans to revolutionize the Philippines and also make it one of the leading manufacturing destinations in Asia. For an ample amount of time, however, National Steel did prove to be miraculous. In 1979, National Steel was the 11th largest corporation in the entire country in terms of sales. It employed a huge amount of people, estimated to be over 3,200 employees, providing adequate payroll of around 7 to 8 million pesos. Its salary package was a hefty amount, as it was higher than the national average. Its presence from the beginning to the end was then felt around the country. However, despite being a leading figure back then, nobody would even know who National Steel is today. Even if there were, it would only be an insignificant amount of people. That is because the company had been struck by one of the largest financial crises ever to hit the Philippines. In 1997, the Asian financial crisis resulted in the company being liquidated, and after years of negotiations and planning for its revival, no plans have ever come to fruition. Today, nothing will probably ever match the reputation and economic contribution of the Iligan steel mill brought to the Philippines. So how did such a giant corporation, which was once known as not only a leader in the steel industry of the Philippines, but also as a leader in the entire Asian continent, fall? Was it really just due to the Asian financial crisis, or was there more to it? Well, let us understand everything, starting at the very beginning. During the Second World War, the Philippines had constantly been undergoing strife led by the Japanese and American turbulence. However, with fighting going on around the country, it also meant one thing: there was going to be a lot of iron scrap waste. These remnants of the raging war, therefore, were abundant. The huge amount of supply could then either be used or thrown away, but the government chose the former, which eventually helped the creation of what is called the National Shipyard and Steel Corporation, a business located in Iligan City that was established in the year 1952. And its initial operations were to use the abundant supply of iron scrap waste and turn it into a finished product. However, these scrap materials were not significant enough to continue operations for decades, and sooner than later, they would start to become scarce. This brought the entire corporation to quickly remaneuver its strategies and eventually landed them becoming a dedicated steel mill. Unknown to most people of today, it was also during that time that the Philippines had also emerged to become the second country after Japan to have a steel mill of its own. That means it was way ahead of the major industrialized country winners of today, such as Taiwan, South Korea, or any other Asian nations. And the construction was enabled due to the help of the United Nations, along with a $62.3 million loan that helped the corporation to purchase the necessary equipment to ensure that the facility would function as planned. However, the project was starting to look bleak, and funding securements were not enough to construct a giant steel mill. So an idea came about. To ensure the success and viability of the steel mill, they went on to privatize the entire business, meaning they would sell it to the private sector. By 1963, it was bought by the Jacinto family, a family that also ran a separate company known as the Iligan Integrated Steel Mills Incorporation. However, that privatized company did not last. The Steel Mill Corporation had gone on to default on its loans, which led the corporation to cease its operations except for a few mills. The creditors of the loans had then taken the company, and as time passed, by 1974, the Development Bank of the Philippines proceeded to foreclose the plant. The same year, however, saw a newly incorporated governmental body known as the National Steel Corporation, which was like the old corporation, aimed to help industrialize the Philippines. As a government-owned entity, it meant that it could easily access the old Iligan steel mill plant without any barriers, since the Development Bank was also a government-owned corporation. So when it was implemented, it immediately acquired the assets under a lease with the development bank, these assets that were left by the Iligan Steel Mill Corporation. By 1974, the National Steel Corporation of the Philippines had quickly emerged to become the 71st largest corporation in the entire country by total sales, and it only took a few years by 1979 for it to become the 11th largest corporation by total sales. The quick succession from a struggling company going under default and passing its assets to a newly implemented government body was so profound. Its immediate impact was felt throughout the Philippines as it emerged to become a leader in Asia. Throughout the course of its lifetime, its contribution was massive to the entire economy of the Philippines. Around the 1990s, the contribution of the steel mill to the Iligan city was reported to be over 75% of the total tax revenue. For a single corporation and a single steel mill, although massive, to contribute this much was enormous. The total population of Iligan City in 1990 was over 226,000, and here is a corporation employing not more than 3,200 people, but contributing massively more than the rest of the population. Even after the aftermath of the 1997 Asian financial crisis, National Steel was still producing a sufficient amount of money. By 1998, it had paid over 130 million pesos in taxes. But the challenges were already being felt during those years, and were felt as early as 1995 when the government decided to privatize the entire steel mill. It was purchased by a Malaysian company known as Wingtech Holdings BHD. The trouble was, Wingtech Holdings could not properly function the steel mill, and Wingtech Holdings itself was going under financial troubles. So it did not have any other choice but to sell the entire corporation. Immediately, another Malaysian company known as Hotik Investments picked it up, but even they could not operate the company properly. There were many reasons, however, why even Hotik Investments couldn't keep the entire corporation afloat. First, it was because of the coming 1997 Asian financial crisis, which not only pressured the new owner, but also because that crisis had wrecked so many rising economies around Asia, which undoubtedly killed the demand necessary to ensure operations continued. Secondly, there were also rising tides between other nations. China, for instance, had started to emerge, and South Korea had also waved a flag into the entire steel and manufacturing industry. Therefore, with stiff competition, a new set of owners who may or may not have the expertise to operate the steel mill properly, and a financial crisis, it led the National Steel Corporation to collapse. Initially, its debt ballooned to over 12 billion pesos, and 50% of it was due to the depreciation of the peso led by the Asian financial crisis. The losses reported by National Steel were over 2.6 billion pesos in 1996, and by 1998 significantly went up to over 4 billion pesos. By the time it closed the company around the entrance of the 21st century, it had given its goodbyes to its remaining 1,800 employees, and a liquidation order by the government was placed. But even though the company collapsed, the steel mill was still there. In fact, a lot of proposals had come into play for the next 2 decades. Proposals left and right, claiming that they want to bring back the glory days of the Philippines. In 2004, an Indian company known as Ispat Industries acquired the steel mill. It was a giant steel corporation back in their homeland and should have helped the struggling plant in Iligan. But even they could not do anything. By 2016, new troubles had crept in, and the NSC had failed to pay its real estate taxes, which now amounted to over 4 billion pesos. However, these problems that piled up still did not mean that the Iligan steel mill is forever in disarray. Steel Asia, one of the current largest steel companies in the country, had reached out and offered to buy and revive the NSC. However, even if Steel Asia does get it, or whoever gets it, let it be a foreign investment or the government themselves again, at the end of the day, the once glorious and formidable business that sat in the south of the Philippines will never jump back. Because at this point, there are many more opportunities around the country today, probably more to the reason why the opportunity of Iligan was neglected over the years. Steel Asia, for instance, is now on its way to finishing the first ever steel beam manufacturing plant in the country, known as Lemery Works, which will soon employ over 1,500 people. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.